Good afternoon, good evening, and I'm happy to say good morning because we have people joining us from India, Nigeria, Australia, uh, Canada, as well as, of course, many people across the United States. I'm Andrew Perchuk. I'm the Deputy Director of the Getty Research Institute, and I want to welcome everyone to Imaginaries of LA, Umar Rashid and Sandy Rodriguez in conversation. And let me start by acknowledging that I and the GRI stand on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded lands of the Tongva and Gabrielino peoples. The Getty Research Institute, early in its history, did not have much engagement with Los Angeles. But over the last 20 years, the art, architecture, and visual culture of Los Angeles has become one of our prime areas of collecting and research. And one thing that we've certainly discovered, acknowledged, is that there are many Los Angeleses. You can probably say that about many cities, but I think that the geographical spread and the history of segregation really have come together to have many differing Los Angeleses. And tonight we're going to hear about two that in many ways are a fascinating window into a literal Los Angeles, in the sense that both artists are very interested in issues of mapping and the way history is written onto the landscape. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to tonight's moderator, Ziana Gilbert, who is a senior research specialist here at the Getty Research Institute.
Thanks, Andrew. Hi, everyone. My name is Ziana Gilbert. We started Imaginaries of LA as a series of conversations that explores what's at stake in the representation of LA and provides a forum for debate about the past, present, and future of the city. Our last events were conversations between artists and curators, but this time we're pleased to have two artists with many resonances between their work, Umar Rashid and Sandy Rodriguez. We began the series about a year ago in conjunction with the release of the website 12 Sunsets, which you can see in my background here. And it presents a vast trove of photos from Ed Ruscha's Streets of Los Angeles archive, taken between 1966 and 2005. The first of the photos from this archive were taken by Ruscha for the artist book, Every Building on the Sunset Strip in 1966. And he devised a method to capture the street with what he called motorized photos, using a camera with a motor mounted on the back of his pickup truck and driving back and forth on Sunset to capture both sides of the street. The questions at the heart of the archive stand as an opportunity to converse with contemporary artists who've engaged with the city in their work. And I should say the state and the contemporary global scenario as well in the context of Sandy and Umar's work. At the same time, this archive provokes questions about what it means to create an archive of LA's urban landscape, who has agency in this, and what stories are highlighted or buried. We started this series of events during the pandemic and thinking about the reckoning and inequities of our cities and the country, and the amnesia surrounding historical inequities that connect with the present. And we couldn't have two more interesting artists in terms of those questions to talk with us tonight. We saw an opportunity to consider the histories and futures of LA and to engage with imaginaries of the city beyond its dominant representation. The first event was with Edgar Arsenault and Julian Myers-Szubinska. We talked about the city being what Mike Davis has described as a conspiracy of silence about its histories. And Norman Klein has talked about this as a kind of history of forgetting. And we're very interested in the ways in which artists can intervene and use the conventions of storytelling to review those histories. The second event was between Guadalupe Rosales and Pilar Tompkins Rivas, in which we explored Rosales's online crowdsourced archives of 1990s era Latinx culture, dance parties, and self-representation on the east side of LA. And Rosales's work really created an accessible archive of previously unaccounted histories. You can watch the two previous conversations on the Getty's YouTube channel, and this conversation also will be available in a few days. So it's my pleasure to introduce Umar and Sandy. I'd like to thank both of them for making time for this event in the midst of an incredibly busy time for both of them. Umar Rashid is a storyteller. He employs writing, illustration, painting, and sculpture to construct fabulations or alternative historical narratives that reference a panoply of cultures, collapsing geography of time. This past year, his work was featured at the Huntington and the Hammer Museum as part of the biennial Made in LA 2020. He currently has a solo show at Blum and Poe in LA and upcoming presentations in Miami and New York. Sandy Rodriguez is an artist and researcher who investigates the methods and materials of painting and image making across cultures and histories, exploring the intersections of history, social memory, contemporary politics, and cultural production. Her work will be featured in upcoming presentations at the Huntington, LACMA, and many other institutions. We're going to have a slide at the end so you can see where all the shows are. I'd like to just finish before I pass over to Sandy and Umar by thanking the Streets of Los Angeles team, Megan Salavedra, Emily Pugh, Whitney Graham, and especially Isabel Wade for their engagement with the planning of this program, as well as the GRI's fantastic programming lead, Jennifer de la Fuente, and everyone at the Getty who's been involved in the planning of the program. So now I'm going to invite Umar and Sandy to begin their presentation. I'll rejoin them at the end for the Q&A. And we invite you in the meantime to contribute your questions in the Q&A box throughout the talk. Thank you, Umar and Sandy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. As you just heard, my name is Sandy Rodriguez. I am thrilled to be in conversation with Umar Rashid, whom I have been a big fan of since that show that I saw at Taylor de Cordoba, in 2005 or 2006, with the cut paper dolls. I am thrilled to be able to be in this talk, and we're going to have 4 different sections that are going to span about 10 minutes each. And that is certainly not enough time to dig deep and enjoy as much as we have to share on these subjects. So the first is temporality, past, present, and future. And Umar, what they really are curious about is how we use historical documents in our work and what the challenges are of going back and forward in time. I'll go ahead and begin with this Mappa de Los Angeles that is for the 35 Angelenos killed by police in 2018. And this challenge of going backwards and forwards is a dance in my practice. So I began by looking at the Los Angeles Times and their database of Angelenos that have been executed in public by LAPD and their stories, trying to figure out ways visually in a narrative image to plot the locations and to understand how we got here. I know that in Los Angeles, we are the carceral capital of the world, and that this is a place that consistently has these narratives year after year. So it was a matter of reading each biography of each person, mapping the locations, trying to understand ways in which I can shift that present to the past. In the details that you see in the sky, there are two comets. And historically, when you're looking at colonial documents of Mexico, a comet has been an omen of death. So you have the comet that is featured in a codex called the Codex Durand on the right. And on the left, you have a comet that is featured from the Florentine Codex, created amid a pandemic 500 years ago. There are a number of botanicals placed throughout Los Angeles that are representative of specific areas. This piece was commissioned by the Los Angeles Municipal Art Gallery in Hollywood, so I prominently featured Toyon, which is centrally located by Hollywood, which is called California Holly, and there's a myth that Hollywood was named after it. Towards the east, you have a desert plant. In the south, you have manzanita. There are also small details of state-sanctioned violence throughout the picture. So this object invites you to admire the transverse range of Los Angeles, which are the mountains from the San Gabriels to the Santa Monica Mountains, which divide Northern and Southern California and create the floristic province that is so dynamic here in Los Angeles. The map that you see here also includes a number of elements from past and present, and I use scale as a device to pull and push attention from the viewer and to get them really kind of cued in to some of those details. The challenge is having way too many images and posting them all around the object in small little postcards of small study sketches, because I'm working in watercolor on a very unforgiving support, which is a ceremonial sacred paper called amate, which when you paint on it, you have one shot. It absorbs all the color. You cannot blend, you cannot erase, you cannot ask for forgiveness. You have to start over. The colors that are used are also symbolically and conceptually placed. The Maya blue that you see is a color that came into cultural and image making in the 3rd century. And when you look at the statistics of the people that have been gunned down by LAPD, they are African American and Latino. So you have this Maya blue representing the Latino population, and you have the various logwoods and ochres and combinations of locally sourced pigments representing the communities. And so I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to you, Umar. Again, how do you think about the historical documents, and what are the challenges of going back and forth?
Oh, well, thank you, Sandy. That was great. I saw that person. I mean, I saw that map at Lamog, and I loved it. I think I like rolled up on you and it was like, yo, I love this Sandy. And, you know, I was wild out. I had my kids with me. It was crazy. So, you know, that was fantastic. But, you know, you were actually talking about the piece to someone when I surreptitiously, you know, walked up to you, and you know, I wasn't really listening because I just wanted to see it, you know, and it was just beautiful, and it was super long. Like, what's the size of that?
That is 97 inches by 47 inches tall, and there were helicopters.
Yeah, it was like, yeah, it was massive. So thank you to the Getty. Thank you for everybody having me. And like, yeah, like, you know, I thought that the only person I can actually do this talk with would be Sandy. So I'm so happy to be in conversation with you. I've also enjoyed your work for quite some time. But you know, I approach my my work from a similar perspective, except what I do is I created an entire universe that spans from the death of Oliver Cromwell in, I believe, 1658 to the Portuguese abolition of slavery in 1880, and is a global narrative. But how my work fits into Los Angeles is I do a lot of site specific work, you know, since the narrative is global. Wherever I go, you know, I do 6 months of research and 6 months of execution. So in execution, I mean, like, I paint for 6 months. And the other 6 months is like reading YouTube, talking to people on the street, blah, 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 listening to people who are smarter than me talk. And so I did all this, and I've been doing it for about, started this particular narrative in about 2003. And, you know, I've just been growing it ever since. But my relationship to Los Angeles is unique in the sense that I moved to Los Angeles in 2000. And in 2000, I first moved to Westchester. I'd like to say Inglewood. People were like, nope, it's Westchester. I was like, okay, it's Westchester. So I lived in Westchester with my my aunt and my wife, and then we moved to a hotel in Little Tokyo, and then we moved to Koreatown because I wanted to feel more like at home, you know, because I'm from Chicago, so I wanted to feel like that urban environment. And then I moved to, eventually I ended up in Lincoln Heights, and it was when I got to Lincoln Heights that everything started to make sense, because I was totally amazed, completely amazed and enamored by the landscape and how this city is so beautiful, like just naturally beautiful. I mean, the birds, the wildlife, the flowers, the plants, and everything. But you know, also there's also the violence, and you know, and there's the internecine warfare by, you know, rival groups, people, and you know, then there's the race, and then you see the ugliness. But I choose to find the beauty in the hideous wherever I go. So, you know, I had this kind of, you know, way through the city, and I saw a lot, and you know, hang out, would go everywhere because you have to drive everywhere here. So I just managed to, the last 5 or 6 years, I managed to put in all this work about the California mission system. So this, the Battle of Malibu that you see here is like, I had done 5 shows starting in Sacramento at the it's in the Crocker Museum. That's where it started. Then it went to then it went to Los Angeles, and it went to San Francisco, and then it went back down to Los Angeles, and it went to the University of Arizona. And I've been making this narrative for about 5 to 6 years. And so this was supposed to be the culmination of it, but it's just like, it's like the gift that keeps on giving. So, you know, that's how I got into this. And, you know, so while it is just a small part of my story, it's a big part. So, yeah.
Amazing. I loved seeing the sea monsters and the various names. I too add sea monsters into my maps.
Yeah.
Because it's the history of mapping, right? And when we're looking at these like 16th century maps, there's like sea monsters and cyopods and creatures from another planet. But it's interesting. Earlier, I was touring my niece through the studio and being like, there's real and imagined animals. Help me identify them. So the next source material is, or the next slide is about material. And what they'd love for us to discuss is about how the material supports the content. How does the material support the form?
Right.
With the map that you're looking at, Mappa de la Región Fronteriza de Alta y Baja Califas, hand processed dyes. This is the moment where I shifted from working on Arches paper with prefabricated French and German and Japanese watercolors. And I was like, here is a moment to really connect content and form.
Mhm.
And I had started working with cochinilla, which is this red color that you see on the lower part of Baja. And if you can skip the slide, I can show you a detail. So and I'm gonna set my timer. So in 2017, I had an opportunity to really go into each of the deserts of California and spend about 5 days in the desert, off grid, 2 hours away from any city or hospital running water or Wi-Fi. I was working with an herbalist. You pack in everything, you pack it out, and I mean everything. In the border region, I'm originally from National City, right at the border. I moved to Los Angeles 87 when I was 11, but I lived in San Diego, I lived in Tijuana, and then I moved to LA. So getting to do field study at the border near, at the very kind of edge of the Sonoran Desert was a very eye-opening experience. And cochinilla is this it's a scale insect that produces red that you can find on cactus. It's this white webby material. So that's why you see the cactus in the lower portion of the slide. You see the Incopa range and these ocotillo that look like little fingers kind of coming up from the desert. And each camp out was under the full moon. And when you're looking at the desert under the full moon, it just glows this brilliant blue. You don't need your headlamp. You can just walk around. There were also bedrock morteros where people process food, medicine, color. Huge, where 6, 7 people could sit and process color. So that's what you're looking at over towards the center of the slide. And then the only palm that is indigenous to Southern California, Washingtonia filifera, in these palm desert oases. And we would hike out in 100 degrees, have our lunch underneath, do these drawings, and hang out. It was pretty spectacular. So I included little landscapes. Those little razor wire circles that you see are immigration detention centers. There are a number of real and imagined animals. So you have a rabbit up at the edge of the Sonoran Desert, heading right up into the Mojave Desert. And it was April by the time I was up in the Mojave, which is why you have these humping rabbits in the top center there, near the Joshua tree and some other endemic plants that grow there and nowhere else in the world. In the ocean area, you see a papalomichi and an ocelomichi. So it's an ocelot fish and a flying fish. The flying fish, the papalomichi, carries the souls of the warriors that have been the residents of resistance. On the right-hand side, you see color processing, because cochinilla was the first color that I started processing. And so I took out all the images from a 500-year-old text and I added myself. The historic image that this is based on was created in a pandemic. So they were sequestered in a university in Mexico 500 years ago. They couldn't go out and get color, so it was black and white. This piece is created in 2017. So I added a little bit of color to update it and include myself in the portrait of the maker. So let's go ahead and move to the next slide. And Umar, how does material support the content and what changes do you make? Umar, you froze on us for a second.
I thought you froze, and I was like, no, 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 no. I was listening to you, and then you just froze out, and I was like, what happened? But anyway, I'm back. But I love that piece too. This piece is called Per Capita. I made this during the pandemic. It was actually the material is deer leather. So it's the suede part of the deer hide. And a long time ago, I was always fascinated by, Neolithic art and especially Native American ledger drawings. And I still am, to this day. But now I do more work on canvas and work on paper and various material sculptures and things like that. But I wanted to go back and do something on skin, but I realized that I used to use rawhide, and working on suede with a brush is extremely difficult. So I I decided to do this work on this suede, and it worked out, and I was really happy with it. And per capita, for each head, and there was this war that's going on in the desert, and I absolutely hate the desert. I love Frank Herbert and I love Doom, but you will never get me to go into the desert, because it's something about the power. For me, it's the power of water. Water does it for me. I love water, and so in the desert there's tons of water, but you just have to know where to find it. So I wouldn't be one of the people who would go out and camp under the starry night with you, Sandy. No disrespect, but that's not my bag. But I made this piece. This is, again, I did several pieces on skin. This is just one of the more recent ones that I also made during the pandemic. And I like to call it the plague. It gives it, more of a resonance. When we call it the pandemic, it just sounds like, oh my God, pandemic too close to pandemonium. And as you can see in my work, I enjoy wordplay all the time. So even like the severed heads, like and this relationship between humans and gods that happen a lot, and that happened for me maybe about 8 or 9 years ago, because once after telling the colonial narrative, like the one thing about history is that it never changes because we don't change. So now I'm trying to ask, I've gone into the realm of the cosmic because I'm trying to ask different questions, not necessarily the right or wrong questions, but different questions in terms of how we live and we relate to the world, and why these things, come up time and time again, and we always, kind of succumb to the same pitfalls that we always do. So this is per capita. I've made several pieces like this. This is there are many like this.
How big is it?
Oh man, it's kind of hard to say. I mean, I think it's like about 5.5 feet across, and there was some ratty parts that I had to cut, and I cut it and I made it all different because I usually do things that are either square, circle, rectangular. I'm very like people also often think that I'm like this like kind of wild, crazy person, but I'm really like kind of anal when it comes to spatial relationships. This it's like about maybe 3.5 feet high and 5.5 feet wide. Yeah, it's a massive. Well, not massive, but it's a very large piece. God, there's so much to say about it. I love lasers. I like lasering things, and again, play on words. I don't know if you can see it at the top in the middle. It says capitulate. It's per capita, capitulate, but capit, I also studied Latin. I went to Catholic school growing up because my mother worked there. So, I studied Latin for, some years, and I continue my studies on various websites, with my Latin. I mean, dead languages are fascinating. And, it's not dead because it's so much of it is used in, especially in legal terms or medical terms. So it's like, this old ancient thing keeps coming back. And just like with all other ancient colors, and I know I'm kind of rambling, but that's just...
I am curious though, is this the poor side or the suede side of the deer hide?
It's the suede side. The other side, I would just made some boots.
And so it's so it's an acrylic on the hide.
It's acrylic on hide.
And how did you come to deer?
Deer, just happened to be left over. I've worked on bear, I've worked on horse, I've worked on elk, I've worked on moose, I've worked on goat. And I also make drums too with some of the hides, but I haven't done that in a while. Ever since my kids, like I asked them, did they want to make some drums, and they were like, "No, Papa," and I was like, well, kind of dashed my hopes on that. But this is the suede side, so it's a little more difficult to work on. It destroys brushes in a heartbeat.
Oh yes. Oh, I know. I destroy many a brush.
I have so much.
It takes
so much paper.
You have so much what?
Your paper, your fig leaf, your fig bark paper.
My fig bark paper, and I'll tell you that it is a study of the past 6 years of figuring out which brushes the material will take. So I found that badger, boar bristle, when you're doing that kind of front kind of dry brush on the very kind of porous support, is what works. And so I imagine that there's so many tests and trials and tribulations to figure out what's going to work on the suede side.
Yeah, I'm like the little engine that could. Like, I'll just if I have to use a pencil, and crush it in and just crush pigment, like I'll get it done. But it's you can actually sand it down a little bit. You can, if you want to work on suede, if you want to work on the suede side, and you're not using, and some of these are the fabric paints that you get from that one store that's in, but they're really tiny, and they're essentially acrylic. Yeah. So there's so much you can do.
There's a lot of play involved.
Yeah. Totally. Like,
a lot of play, a lot of experiments, a lot of disasters and accidents, but we make it work.
Yeah, but nope, this is more unforgiving than your paper, because if you mess up once, no sanding in the world. Well, I mean, you have to.
Well, I can't sand, and if I oversaturate the amate, guess what happens? There's no sizing on that paper. That shit falls apart. It opens up, and you ruined a 9-foot sheet, and you have to start all over. But these are materials that have power, that are symbolic, that support the content of our work, and there's a reason that we're compelled to work on them and expose the viewer to these materials. I think it's time to talk about visual narratives.
Visual narratives, yes.
Yes.
It's one of my favorite maps that I did a long time ago.
Excellent. You want to start us off? We want to talk and hear about the creation of personal narratives, received histories. How do you use symbols? How do you use emblems?
Well, so mapping for me started out as a way to augment my narrative. So I remember I was making these kind of like Game of Thrones back in 2006. I was making these like Game of Thrones kind of maps, like The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, this is Mount Doom and blah, 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 blah. And then, when I started to research maps actually, and, look at the borders. So, like they always do like those borders that usually has a legend on it, but I didn't do a legend for this one. And then little nautical navigation, the compass that's usually on there. So I basically mimic the European style of map making. This particular maps, La Guerra de las Cruces, was a war that I had between the indigenous polities of California and the mission system. And so that's kind of been, most of my Los Angeles narrative has been about that relationship between the colonizer, the church, and the people, and then the migrants who came here from various places. And so, but the symbology in it, like there's always like a fort, flags. I mean, everything kind of provides its own symbolism here in my work. And like in the La Guerra, like there's the LA symbol, like the kind of script, old English script LA, because I see it everywhere. And I was like, I'll just put this in and, give a nod. I like to nod certain things because I merge past, present, and future. So you'll see certain things look very contemporary while other things look very historic. And they all kind of, they all just kind of work together. But this map was on paper, I think it's 30 by 22. It's not a very large map at all. But, and then there's rap lyrics in the top for Center Saints and Scramblers and Gamblers and Dirty Money Handlers, in reference to the colonialists. This time, they're from New Spain, so which would be before the Mexican War of Independence, when it was the viceroyalty of New Spain. So it's it's totally, talking about a totally different group of people at that time. And within my narrative is 1795. So the symbolism is just to make people more familiar with it, because it's something that people can recognize. But then I also do things like I change certain things. If the fort is on fire, I'll put like a little flame on top of it. There's Chumash boats alongside Spanish war galleons and Yankee clipper ships and all these things. So I just take from a lot of different sources. And then there's also a couple of sea monsters in this. And then you can't read there's these little tiny words, and it says like what's being imported and what's being exported. So usually what's being imported is like religion, self-hatred, and what's being exported is like gold and salt and things like that. So it's one of my favorite ones. So on to you, Sandy. I mean I could talk about this stuff forever, but I know we don't have much time.
I love it. I could talk to you for hours, man. So we're talking about visual narratives. And I love the moments of overlap and the moments of divergence between our kind of practice and what we're working with and what we're motivated by and how we're inspired. So this particular piece is Mappa of the Child Detention Centers, Family Separations, and Other Atrocities. So this is created in 2018 when the policy of family separation was in full uptick. And what you're looking at is a 97-inch by 47-inch wide work in hand processed color anamate paper. The region of the United States that you see is based on several maps. So in 1848, you have the land grab, where the entire western part of the US is taken. And so that's the boundary marker that you see at the top. There's also the Gadsden Purchase, which is over in the lower border area, and Texas as well, right? I am compressing time and using a lot of these devices, but in terms of the visual narrative, it's that question of how the hell did we get here? And in the lower right, you see a ship. That ship is the USS Emancipation. That is from the 1950s. In the 1950s, we had a policy that was called Operation Wetback, where they rounded up Latinos in the Western US, American or Mexican born. They caged them in places like Elysian Park, put them on trains, took them to Texas, shipped them in cooperation with the Mexican government to Veracruz. 8 to 10,000 people on a ship, and you can search the archives of various Texas historical societies and look at video of this. But people were jumping from these ships. I gotta set my damn timer or I will blather on. People are jumping from these ships. And I'm telling you that people were being repatriated who had never been to Mexico, who didn't speak Spanish, and were dying in the water. And these are these cycles, these moments of where and how we have experienced this type of violence in the past.
Right.
And there is this amnesia of these cycles of violence. In terms of symbols, I've included these small guard shacks, these panoptic eyes, where you have all of the child detention centers that I could find on a ProPublica map all throughout, and they're in cobalt violet, which is a color that is a modern colorant. The rest are hand processed colorants that are used for visual narratives and storytelling in the Americas that go back from a recipe that I'm basically working with. It's 500 years old, but goes back thousands of years in terms of Mexican image making. Mm-hmm. Each area in the map has small vignettes of places where I've gone camping, where I've slept under the stars and seen the endemic plants, mm-hmm. the animals, talked with people. And so I'm collapsing time and space, but the symbolic kind of translation occurs with the real and imagined sea animals, the historic sources. There are weeping women right at the border that are looking directly at the child detention centers in the hottest parts of the desert, where they had thousands of unaccompanied minors in tents in 100 degrees, where they are separating families systemically. And then these juxtapositions of natural elements.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, like this place, I mean, much like many places, it's just sick. It's just sickening, like what people do to each other. And then how complicit, you know, so it's not, you can't even really, there's no big bad, you know, in these scenarios. And a lot of times in my work, like, you know, there is no big bad, like everyone is entirely complicit, you know, like everybody's guilty, like there's no, you know, because for whatever reason, God, I'm not even gonna go into that quote, but anyway, sorry to interrupt. I just
No, this is the conversation. This is about a dialogue.
I was listening to what you're saying, and I was, wow, like that's just, I didn't even know about this.
So it's really about trying to take all of these narratives from all these different sources and really figuring out how I can create an object that is a direct citation from all these different sources to give viewers from so many different backgrounds an opportunity to say, what is that? To prompt conversations, to create narratives within each group of people, within each household, within each kind of dialogue, to identify things that are familiar, to investigate the symbols. And I'll tell you, it was directly after this that I started to create keys for the maps. So there wouldn't be a question about what is that there isn't an open interpretation. This is all factually research-based. This takes months to create. I have to go out to each of these places by train, by car, by flight. I need to do this field study, process these colors, say the recipes out loud, connect to the painters that came before me to pull that strength to tell these stories. And it is, it's a joy to share the screen and the conversation with you.
Yeah.
And really just kind of hit on some of these these conversations, man.
Yeah, and this, wow. I mean, but I want to listen, like sometimes, like, the smartest person in the room is usually the one who listens, and not the one who talks. So like, I'm listening, I'm learning, I mean, I don't think I really have much to teach you and anything, but I can learn a lot more, because at the end of the day, we all seek, I think what we all, well, not always seek, but I mean, what I really want is to seek harmony in all places, because justice is an abstract, harmony, although abstract, harmony is possible. I mean, animals do it all the time.
Umar, you're rolling us right beautifully into our final segment, which is motivations. Why in the hell are you making this work?
Oh, well, first off, because I need to stop sleeping on my couch. No, I no, I'm making it work because I never saw myself. I never saw myself in a historical record. When I did see myself, it was like a caricature. It was like, it's always related to slavery or some other form of minstrelies. So I couldn't very well go on like that forever. So I started looking at alternative sources of history and, trying to uncover different stories about, my own background, my own ancestry, things like this. As things became digitized and more available, I started to learn more. But even before that, I've always had a desire to know, because the biggest tragedy that happened to the African American was that we were cut off from our culture, we were cut off from our language, we were cut off from our religion, we were even cut off from our names. And when you lose your name and you lose your culture, you lose your identity, and then you accept the identity of the people who put you in this situation. Then it's like I mean, yeah, it's unexplainable. It's an emptiness. It's a gap that can't be filled. And so the best way that I can fill that gap and try to rebuild myself from that pain and that loss is to create what I would imagine would be a parallel universe, in a sense that everything happens. Like, I mean, I don't omit any of the atrocities. I don't omit the bad things that happen. It's not like it's all rainbows, or I'm not trying to remake like Django or make like some blaxploitation white revenge.
What do you got against rainbows?
Oh, did I say rainbows? Maybe I did. Oh yeah, happiness and rainbows. Nothing.
Teasing you.
Really. No, so no, what I really want to do is just, did I get cut off again?
You froze for a sec. You're fine. Keep going.
Okay. Yeah. So, we just don't have, you just don't have anything to, God, I lost my train of thought. Anyway, so Sandy, I'm gonna let you take this one, and then I'm gonna round it out with, or should I just keep going? Because
It's cool. You got a couple more minutes. We're talking about motivations. How does history, LA, California inspire your work? Why the hell are you making this work?
Well, again, I'm just here for, I'm actually moving on to my, I'm going to revisit my California narrative again, but I'm moving on to my Caribbean narrative, which then leads into, talk about the continent, of Africa, and then about Europe and even the subcontinent in India, and the relationship between India and Africa. So like I said, mine is it's a global narrative. So I just, whenever I'll spend like 5 years in a place just to build up a narrative, and then I'll just continue to move on. So this was, it was that when Trump got elected, and then, they're talking about the border war. So sin fronteras, like, there are no borders, like all land masses are connected. The only things are, they're just separated by natural phenomenon, like mountains or rivers or stuff, so usually used to be, that's how places got, that was the line of demarcation. Whereas now it's like, it's just crazy. You just like, yeah, there's all these mountains are ours, and in this land, and oh yeah, well, we'll give you a little piece of this river. You know how you get, especially if you look at the scramble for Africa in 1880, and what happened with the West, like you were talking about the Gadsden purchase, and then after the Mexican-American War, like, how this place just got, from sea to shining sea, really became policy, or and maybe it always was, even from the Lewis and Clark expedition. Maybe that's what that whole thing was about. You buy a bunch of land, get the Louisiana Purchase, even though that's not your land. Use that, use some weird subtext to start a war with Santa Anna and invade Mexico. It's all ridiculous. But anyway, I think you are on. This is the map of from What is the Color When Black is Burned, Sin Fronteras. This was a map that I made a little bit more about, it was more about Arizona, but there was still the narrative from, I did a narrative in Denver, I did a narrative about Louisiana, I did a narrative about Memphis, I did a narrative about California, and a little bit Northern California. So it's all these things put together. And also shout out to the University of Arizona and the Nevada Museum of Art and New Image Gallery, and everybody who helped me out. So you go, and I'll figure out something else to say.
Thank you. That is awesome. What you're looking at here is the latest map in the series Codex Rodriguez Mondragon that's been in production for about a year and a half. This is the latest commission from the Huntington Museum, and it is entitled You Are Here. Tongva, el pueblo de Nuestra Señora la Reina de Los Ángeles de Porciúncula, Los Angeles. As a resident of Los Angeles since 1987, it has been a passion of mine to research a bit about those histories that have been erased, those parts of the city that have literally been bulldozed, those archives that are now lost to us. This is a 97 by 97 inch hand processed color on a Mappa paper map that we just finished installing yesterday. And it uses evocative representation of topography, language, and land use over time to make visible the movements of peoples that have and continue to call this place home. The Tongva have been the caretakers of this area for 12 to 14,000 years. Similar to the way that people find maps in public spaces, I've positioned contemporary names of places as well as historic rancho names and the Tongva names so that people can locate their community, locate places they visited, worked, lived, or would like to visit. You're invited to pause, look, and locate destinations or histories in this monumental multilingual map of our city. Native plants, native animals, a sacred oak is positioned as a cosmic tree that provides the axis mundi from the underworld to the celestial realm. The base of the cosmic tree has the cardinal directions. Mm-hmm. There are scenes of uprisings, of moments of resistance. On the right-hand side in the final version, this was the composite analog and digital sketch. of the uprising of the Tongva at the San Gabriel mission. There is an image of Toy Purina kicking the stool in front of stocks, in front of the San Gabriel mission. It is an opportunity to really look at our past, our present, and future ahead under a rainbow, and to locate visions of a better tomorrow underneath the constellation of the Seven Sisters, which is a Tongva narrative.
Oh yeah, yeah. So that's why you didn't want me to.
Shit talk the rainbow.
Yeah. I was like, it is. Well, and the hummingbirds, don't they have something to do with like
Weechly Lepochly, yeah. Yeah. So every element has like many layers. But one thing that I will say is that as I started this research, I was working with a dear friend, a very dear colleague, a Tongva elder, Julia Bogany.
Mm-hmm.
And she and I had so many conversations about curriculum and interpretive opportunities, and really to think about how we can make this accessible to so many different types of audiences. And unfortunately, she suffered a stroke and passed.
Oh.
This piece is dedicated to Julia.
Julia.
These are about relationships. These are about history. These are about conversations, and these are about providing opportunities and entry points for dialogue and conversation, moving us forward and thinking about this place we call home. I'm going to stop there at 6 o'clock.
Oh. Yeah. Oh. Yeah. Wow.
What's coming up, Umar?
Oh man. I still got my show still up in Washington. Bloom and Poe just opened. I'm doing a half gallery next week on the 17th of November. Sorry, so half gallery is actually on the 17th of November. That's the new show that I made based on the Warriors, the film The Warriors. So it's a show in 6 parts. The first part is called the name of the title of the series in 6 parts is Ancien Regime Change. So it's talking about like the end of I'm leaving the revolutionary period of this work and going into more like the back to the imperial style where everything is stratified. And then I go to Basel and I do this some quiet work, the work about like the Caribbean and still the revolutionary struggle, but there's also like revolutionaries gotta go swimming, revolutionaries gotta eat food, like we create these mythic heroes, but they again everybody shits and bleeds and dies. So and also they enjoy theme parks and they enjoy waterfalls and rainbows like Sandy does. So so that's more of like a lyric, like I call the show that I'm doing at Tawani the Terrence Malick version of what I've been doing this year, because the Bloom and Poe show is just straight up energy and lasers and and then Bloom and Poe's the half gallery one is like about organization and things of that nature, and then the last one is kind of like just like a quiet thing to end such a maddening year.
Excellent.
Yeah. And what about you, Sandy?
There's a couple of things over here on the right. Go to my website, check them out. But we just opened Denver Art Museum Revisión, where you can see one of the large maps that is contextualized with the entire Latin American art collection. Huge shout out to Victoria Lyle and Jorge Rivas for including my work there. I've been working for the past year with Dennis Carr over at the Huntington Museum on a reinstallation of the American art galleries on an exhibition called Borderlands. It started with my Caltech Huntington Fellowship and has been ongoing. My solo show at the Eamon Carter Museum of American Art opens in December. Mixpantli opens at LACMA, where you will see 5 monumental maps organized by Diana Magaloni in the bottom floor of BCAM. upon the 500-year anniversary of the Spanish invasion and conquest. Then followed by Denver Art Museum, which has a 3-leg tour, which is an exhibition around Malinche. But I know
The actual person, Malinche?
Yeah, the real person, Malinche, who has been given such the treatment over the past 500 years as traitor, survivor, the icon, the legacy, Malinche.
Yeah, she didn't, in my
No,
opinion, she didn't
no,
deserve all
no.
that.
There's all kinds of good stuff. Zana, I know you have questions.
I do. Well, first of all, thank you both so much. It's
Thank you.
really wonderful to hear you speaking to one another. And I know that we wouldn't have got that detail about badger hair brushes if it wasn't two artists talking to each other. So that was really amazing. Well, we're going to go into the Q&A. We have 10 questions already. I'm sure they're going to be mounting up. So the first question we have from Sarah Dickinson is for Sandy. Was harvesting the cochineal itself part of your process? For both Sandy and Umar, it sounds like the materiality of your work is a deep and important part of your process. Are there materials or techniques you're excited about exploring further or adding to your work? So it's actually for both of you.
I'll tell you that the first 4 years of this series were really focused on plants. So it was about understanding organic colorants and how to stabilize them, process them, do heat extractions, test pH levels, and really stabilize the organic plant-based color. It wasn't until the past year and a half where I have been keenly interested in foraging ochres and mineral pigments myself. I have not successfully fully processed and harvested cochinilla yet. There is a very, very long process of harvesting, drying, creating a precipitated dye in a lake to then create a stable watercolor pigment that will last. So it is site specific in terms of field research, and I will use a combination of organic and mineral colorants that I will then weigh the kind of limited time only versus permanent color.
Oh, I think we lost Umar again, but seems like that only lasts for about a minute. So did you have anything to say, Sandy, about sort of future materials and other uses?
In terms of materials, I'm really excited to continue playing with monumental códices or accordion books that are the manuscripts that were systemically burned to erase the history of this area. And so I'm working with a paper maker in San Pablito in Puebla, who is creating these monumental accordion books that you will see on display at the Huntington Museum. And I will continue to work in mineral pigments that I then collect, process, levigate, and paint with.
Thanks.
Welcome back,
okay,
Umar.
Great timing. Are there other materials, Umar, that you're planning to use in your work?
I'm going back to working on rawhide again.
Oh, we're just getting little snippets. Let's move on. The next question is actually, again, for Umar, but I had a sort of related question for you, Sandy. So the questions for Umar are about his alias, Frohook Two Feathers, but I was also wondering about your self-representation in your work and your appearance in your work, and how how you use that as a device to think about yourself as a chronicler of history.
So coming from 3 generations of Mexican and Chicana painters, I seldom see the images of Mexican and Chicana painters in collections, in museums, in art histories. So the insistence on representation is something that is in my bones and in my blood. And I love to take a historic image and drop myself in.
Yeah, I really enjoy that in your work. So, Umar, we lost you for a moment, but there's a question for you, which is about your alias, Frohawk Two Feathers, and I was sort of putting it in context of Sandy using her own image in her work, but you take a very different approach, which is sort of the use of alter egos and aliases and how that
Yeah.
functions.
Well, initially, I have been using aliases, all my life, because I grew up in the theater. Like, my father's a playwright, my mother's an actor, my mother's also a thespian. So my whole life, everything is character driven. Everybody is a character. There's so many facets of the self. And so, I've been writing rap under assumed name. I did performance under a different name. And so I chose the name Frohawk Two Feathers to, talk about, my distant, combine distant indigenous ancestry with, this and, so in creating this story. But, I scaled back from using the name Frohawk Two Feathers because I felt that was being, getting all the attention and not, not focusing on the work. And then, I was I felt I didn't want to take away any agency from any indigenous groups that, or fully, indigenous and doing that, because I don't really know, like, again, like the whole bit, when I was talking about, African-American history, the only history that I do know is the history from the United States. So I didn't feel, but I also didn't feel comfortable. I do identify as a Black American, a Black man. Sometimes I don't even identify as an American. It's just on my passport, just a cosmic being. But, so Frohawk came, when I moved here, I was like, I was walking in the back of my house in Lincoln Heights, and I saw this hawk, and I looked down, and they were.
Oh, we've lost Umar again. Hopefully he comes back. We seem to be losing him just at the moment. He's about to say something. So the next question, Sandy, we'll just go back to you, is about your research process. It says, your work is so rich in archival and historical sources, and you've spoken about your field work. Can you elaborate on your research process? And then we have a second part of the question for Umar, which is about where he looks for and finds alternative histories.
So the research process is very multi-layered. There are a number of entry points. It begins with the current news feeds. I try to make sense with it by digging into archives and into libraries and into journals and into recently kind of published articles that are challenging knowledge that has been previously published. I then consult across disciplines. So I talk with historians, I talk with ethnobotanists, I speak with herbalists, I speak with various members of communities that are site specific to each area. I'll speak with material culture specialists that are like paleoanthropologists. But I'm trying to get as many levels to the material and the content that inspire me to form the material and the content in a way that compels cross-disciplinary dialogue, cross-generational dialogue, and that prompts questions.
Hi, Umar, you're back. Sorry, we keep losing you. So this question was about your where you're looking for alternative histories, and that you mentioned that you kind of went looking for different narrative, and how that research process works.
First it started with the Gutenberg project. I just happen to, I go, the internet is good and bad for me, because I go down like multi-day wormholes about like stuff that I'm interested in. So I went in on something and it led me to another place, and it's like, wow, there's so much information here. And then the Gutenberg project, you can actually find the books. Some of the books are at libraries, and or they're still in print, or it might be the 10th or 15th edition. Just like like if you see my bookshelf back there behind me, I have quite a treasure trove of historical books on history, books on anything from cats to shoemaking. And then even in those books, like even if it's something not necessarily related to history, it's always something related to something about something that happened in antiquity, or like whatever in the colonial period, or something that will give me an idea, and then I'll use that, and then allow my imagination to kind of coast on top of that. Because it's not just the books themselves that a book is nothing. It's just paper with words on it. It's the way that you interact and you engage with the book that really gives it power. So you can read a bunch of books, and it might just seem like gibberish to you. So it's not necessarily the book. It helps, but you get that information first, and then you put like lived experience and things like that on top of it, and then that's how you move through. But one of my favorite books that I use often is a book by John Keegan called The History of Warfare, and that really opened my eyes to how colonialism was able to work, and it didn't work in a vacuum. It had a lot of help, because people want money now, whether you're capitalist or you're anti-capitalist or whatever else it is. Like, throughout history, you see the same things, why did it take Russia 500 years to abandon serfdom, essentially, and why did the United Kingdom decide to abolish slavery in 1810, where they abolished the slave trade, but you don't abolish the actual practice of slavery, because you're still reaping the benefits from these things. So yes, a lot of it is about money. A lot of it's about ideology. A lot of it's about a lot of things. A lot of it just might be about personal hatred or family feud, or, the Hickoks and the McCoys or whatever. I don't know, some reference, but, so I just look at all these things, and, I just throw that shit in the blender, and I drink a cup of that every day.
That's amazing. I love what you said about books, and like the way that you need to interact with them. They're not just kind of static or latent objects. There's a couple of questions here that are asking you about how you approach history and where your maps, so this is for both of you, lead or direct us. And I kind of wanted to add to that, thinking about, because both of you bring together these sources, and you kind of remix all these sources from different historical contemporary periods. But I was really intrigued when you were both talking about sort of including mythical creatures. And I wondered, in relation to these questions, like, what do you think the mythical element and the sort of fictional element brings? Thinking about Umar's sea monster, like, how do you think that helps us see the monster?
I wanted to, if I may, Sandy. Well, I wanted to answer that question because the interesting thing about a lot of the illustrations of sea monsters in those old maps, they're crazy. It was like sometimes it'll just be a giraffe with the head of a boar and the scales of a fish. So they're actually not even really like any, it's not like the chimera or, the echidna, or like something from Greek mythology, is actually just a combination of animals from, you know, around the world that probably Herodotus had drawn up in some of his crazy, insane journeys around, maybe fictional, or I mean maybe literal or fictional journeys around the world. And but I think, you know, again, it's in with humanity, it's our it's our nature to want to create, you know, it's our nature to want to piece things together. It's our nature to want to escape, you know, this what we see. And so I think you know, like people, you know, like while we're still talking about Atlantis, and you know, in the modern era, with the same fervor that they talked about it when, you know, back in the ancient times, you know, like we just have this sense of wonder. And so again, and then also goes back to, you know, we need to start asking ourselves the right questions, because why we keep repeating things is like, yeah, we already know that humans are pretty horrible pieces of shit, but why that is like whatever. Now let's see what you know, what are the motivations. Okay, let's get through that, and then you know, get down and really get down to the meal of it, and truly see the intricacies, the layers of it. And then I think that we would I don't know. I mean, I think something different would happen, but we keep asking ourselves the same silly questions all the time, and not necessarily silly, but just things that we've asked ourselves time and time again throughout the centuries, and it just seems ridiculous to me. So we are the monsters. We're the real monsters.
That's so that's the monster that we see.
Yeah.
Sandy, did you want to take that on? Like, where does the map hope to lead us?
So maps are mirrors of ourselves and of our time. And while in my experience, I've been exposed to European mapping, historic and contemporary, modern mapping, it has been a joy to really research Indigenous mapping in ways in which we spatially describe this place that we inhabit, in ways in which we use sacred mountains, rivers, landmarkers, trees to describe and share our lived experience. In terms of mythical creatures or hybrid creatures, the ones that I include in my maps are all based on historic actual sources, or are based on actual phenomenon, like a giant squid. Yeah, it's probably not capturing a US Customs Border Enforcement marine vessel, but because of global warming, they are ginormous, as in the historic, you know, prints and archives that you see. Yeah.
And it's that it's like that 900-year-old shark too. Did you see that thing?
No, but I did see the one about that.
It's like 500 years old, or anyways.
Did you see the one about the anglerfish that came up?
Oh,
the black
yeah.
anglerfish. Yeah. So in one of the latest maps, there's a giant anglerfish just under a Customs Border Enforcement marine vessel.
So the next question is, words and language are important in both of your works. Is there anything you're reading now that you find inspiring or want to share? And then there's another kind of related question just for Umar, which is, are you influenced by comic books or graphic novels? Which I think the answer is yes.
Yes, definitely so. You know, I was a kid. I didn't have a lot of friends growing up, so I basically just read a lot of books and stayed in, you know, I'm not very athletic. I stayed in the house and read a lot of books, but you know, I never read fiction, mostly except for comic books and graphic novels. But I mainly read reference books, like history books, because my grandmother was she really wanted us to know the natural sciences and things of that nature. And so, you know, I read a lot of books about biology, about history, about you know, just day-to-day things. the periodic, I think I studied the periodic table back and forth and wanted to know what all the qualities of all the minerals were. So yeah, and then there was like the whole lot of mythology, and then yeah, the whole thing about the Marvel comics was my favorite. I'm not a DC fan. If I'm sorry if I offended you. I'm not a DC fan. I always like Marvel comics. And yeah, I read a bunch of them. And the first one was any book that I'm reading now. I would encourage you, and not just because the movie just came out, but if you read Frank Herbert, like some of the parts get a little cringy, but Frank Herbert is a true genius. I paint to his books, and I listen to all 14, even the ones that his son wrote. And because he was an ecologist, and he just has really wonderful grasp on barring the whole white savior narrative. He has this wonderful idea of humanity that I really enjoyed. That was finished by his son Brian Herbert. So there's that. And also you could always read The Wretched of the Earth or Black Skin White Mass, Frantz Fanon. Like, that's always inspiring. Anything else? No, a lot of, actually, I read so many history books. I just really like to listen to, I like rom-coms and trash. Okay, bye. Go Sandy, go Sandy, go.
So
And
I like,
since we're coming to the last 5 minutes, let me roll a couple of questions together for you with this one. So firstly, this question of words and language. There's another question for you that asks about if you ever represent humans in your maps other than yourself. I'll have a final question for both of you after that.
cool. I do use a number of strategies in terms of my work, and portraiture does figure into it. The slides that you saw today are just part of the Codex Rodriguez Mondragon. There are portraits of child migrants, there are portraits of healers, there are self-portraits, there are family portraits, and there's a time and a place to include portraiture within these larger maps and within larger portraits as well as landscapes. In terms of texts that I would say, if we're talking about Los Angeles, that is a must read, and I've gone back through it a million times, and I still don't have all of it firmly in my mind. It's called City of Inmates, Conquest, Rebellion, and the Rise of Human Caging in Los Angeles, 1771 to 1965. It's by historian Kelly Lytle Hernandez, who is an Angelino who I am dying to meet still. So get that book. It tells us how we got here. And what was the other part of the question, Sana?
The question was about language. And
Oh, language.
Language in your work.
So because language is so tricky when you're talking about indigenous language, from the past several hundred years, when you're taking an oral language and you are transcribing it into Roman characters, the historic and contemporary sources have such a wildly ranging way of spelling things that you are not sure if you're referencing the right thing. So it takes months, years of conversations with linguists, retired linguists, contemporary language circles, vetting these sources across at least 3 to agree before I can commit it to the surface of an object. If I'm not sure, it's not going on the object. If you see a blank space, it's because I'm not sure yet, but it'll get there. But I want to do my due diligence and not just repeat errors that have been made and published in the past. And that's what I'll say about language.
Yeah. Me. Hi there. So language with me, I don't really get too hung up on that. Like, if I make a mistake, I mean, I'll try to do my best to correct it, but somebody will correct me, because that's what Instagram is for somebody you really don't know to come and say, you said this wrong. It's like, oh, thank you for correcting me. And, just leave that open, like leave it. I mean, I just leave it open, but yeah, I mean, there's certain like things like Sandy's saying, there's certain things that you probably really shouldn't do. But for the most part, hey, we're human, like we're gonna make mistakes. Like I just, it's not if it's language in that sense, if it's language in the sense of tone, or like I don't know, and everything's in language. We're in a cultural we're in a language shift right now with using pronouns, and then how's that going to affect like romance languages, and how's that going to affect all of these things. So I mean, there's so many things happening, and I don't think it's 100% important to really even be concerned with that, because we might all be talking, and some like Esperanto might actually become a thing for real this time.
Well, we are out of time. There are a couple of questions we didn't manage to get to you.
Oh.
I'm sorry to everyone, but the most important one is, what is your favorite animal? Well, we should cover that before we sign off.
Bears.
Cheetah. It is swift, and it, I don't know. I like a cheetah.
And bears.
Or jaguar. I mean, jaguar, cheetah. Jaguars can swim, and they're cute. But cheetahs, I don't know. They make this little yipping sound. Anyway.
No, I have recurring dreams about bears, and I had a dream that I tickled a baby bear's foot the other night, and it giggled, and I was like, I've never heard a baby bear giggle.
Because it wasn't real, Sandy.
But it was the best thing to wake up to.
I know. It's like, what about the snuggle bear? The one that
No, this was a real bear on a beach.
Real bear. Okay.
Real bear, baby bear on a beach.
I like the snuggle bear. Jumps around, probably smells real good.
Thank you, Sana.
Thank you so much, both of you.
Thank you, Umar.
And
Thank you,
everyone
Sandy.
who
Thank you,
came along.
Thank you, Getty.
And we will hopefully see everyone again.
Yep.
Take care, and good evening, everyone.
Not yet. Wait.